That was replay. Neama Rahmani joining me yet again here. Neama, she says the evidence was misconstrued, saying it wasn't even from the film set Rust. Really? What does she mean?
Her argument is this, right? So you have this individual that brought the evidence forward, Troy Tusk, I believe is his name. And the evidence is linked to a prop store. Okay? These are rounds that were found apparently at this prop store owned by Seth Kenny. The defense argument is that it was Kenny who was providing props to the set. He is the one that provided live rounds. Now, the prosecution can disagree with that all they want. They can argue that it was Hannah Gutierrez-Reed that provided those rounds, and they may well be right. But the point is, that's not a decision for prosecutors to make. This is a disclosure issue. This is a discovery issue. This isn't where the prosecution can take the law and the evidence into their own hands. And it's really one of those situations where it's the cover-up that's the issue and not the crime that occurred. So by failing to disclose this critical evidence, even if it turned out that these rounds were never on the Rust set, that disclosure had to be made. The failure to do so was willful, it was knowing, and that's the violation there.
But Neama, she said there were misconstrued, evidence there that she was not entirely sure about that. She was essentially absolving herself of blame there. Did you make that out?
I did, and ultimately, the question is, the disclosure didn't happen, so the violation is there. The evidence had to be disclosed. Was it a willful failure or was it inadvertent? The only possible chance that the prosecution had in this case is if they could convince the judge in this case that the failure was inadvertent. Now, it would still probably be sanctioned. It would still probably be an adverse jury instruction where the judge would actually instruct the jurors that the prosecution failed to disclose evidence in this case. That evidence may have been helpful for the defense. And there's different versions of these types of jury instructions in every case. But once the judge determined that the failure was willful and intentional, and that the prosecution in this case took matters into their own hands, that was the end of it. That's how you get the most extreme sanction awarded against you, which was the terminating sanctions and the dismissal with prejudice.
So is that why, back to the previous question I'd asked you, the rapidity with which the judge ruled on this, because it was so definitive in her view?
In her view, it was absolutely willful. There was no question that Morrissey, this other special prosecutor, Ms. Johnson, and that law enforcement did not comply with their discovery obligations. They basically hid this evidence from the defense. And when it was clear to the judge that that hiding was intentional, that was it. And I don't think there's any way for Morrissey or Ms. Johnson or any of the other prosecutors in this case to defend themselves. They trialed to no avail. And even the statements that they made to the public right now, they don't make any sense. They need to have some sort of reason why the disclosure wasn't made. You can't argue to the public or to the judge that the evidence is irrelevant and it doesn't matter. That is not their decision to make. That's up to a jury.
Neama, before we go, kind of hone in on this fact with prejudice, meaning Baldwin cannot be retried on this. He leaves Santa Fe, New Mexico, a free man here. Does it close the door for good on this for Alec Baldwin or not? I'm talking criminally.
Criminally, it does, unless an appellate court sets aside this dismissal with prejudice. If the prosecution appeals, and they can appeal this dismissal with prejudice, they're going to have to prove to an appellate court that the violation was not willful, it was not intentional, and that the judge abused her discretion in dismissing the case with prejudice. Judges are the gatekeeper here. They need to make sure that trials in this country, they're conducted fairly, and that the parties receive the discovery that they're entitled to, that their constitutional rights aren't being violated. And that's what the judge did in this case. Now, an appellate court can obviously review this decision, and if they reverse the judge's order, then because the dismissal happened, we'd have to start all over. That's a possibility if the prosecution decides to take this case up on appeal and an appellate court agrees with them.
All right, Neama Rahmani, thanks so much for quickly hopping on there with this breaking news. I don't think really anyone saw coming. Neama, thanks so much. Have a good weekend.